You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. I have Alice Siu. She's the Deputy Director of the Center for Deliberative Democracy at Stanford University. I'm going to talk about issues like sortition and how to improve and change and maybe upgrade democracy so it works better. So Alice, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
If you would, tell me about your work. What projects are you working on right now?
We've got a lot of interesting things happening. So in the last few years with the pandemic, we've actually brought a lot of things online. And it just so happened that we have a AI-assisted deliberation platform that came to its maturity just in time. And so in the last few years, we've been running all of our deliberations online. We did projects in Tokyo and Hong Kong and Chile and Peru and Norway. And next week, we are doing a national one in Taiwan. And they range in topics as well. The next one next week in Taiwan is on climate and reaching net zero. We were in Peru talking about electoral reform. We were in Norway talking about AI fairness. So a variety of different topics happening, all the while still have a couple in-person deliberations happening in different places, but the platform has been something that we are expanding a lot.
This AI platform, what is it? How does it work?
Oh, yes. So it's called the Stanford Online Deliberation Platform. It's a collaboration between us and the Crowdsourced Democracy team here at Stanford. And I'll step back a little bit. One of the things being in Silicon Valley, where people are always trying to insert technology into our work that everyone does. So we had the same thought, and we were trying to figure out what aspect of technology would really benefit the field of deliberative democracy. And we thought that, well, how do we scale deliberation where many, many people, perhaps even whole society, could actually deliberate together? And one of the kind of difficulties in having mass deliberations, let's say, is that in deliberations, you need moderators, neutral moderators that will help facilitate the conversations. And so because of that, we decided to basically put all of the different features that we have in the training that we normally give moderators and built them into this deliberative platform. And so the platform itself, it follows the method that we use, deliberative polling, and how we train our facilitators. So on the platform, it helps the participants navigate the agenda, go through what topics to discuss, helping with pros arguments, con arguments, nudging people to speak. And, they get a cue to participate. And it's a variety of features, and it's been wonderful. It's been working really well in all sorts of.
What does that mean, deliberative polling?
Deliberative polling is a method that we use. It's a way of consulting the public. The components itself includes a random sample of population, so getting a microcosm of the population. And then we have pre-deliberation surveys. We gather them together for small group discussions, then have a plenary session with experts, and we iterate between the small group and plenary sessions until the event is finished, where they do a post-deliberation survey. The whole idea is giving people an opportunity to think about and become informed about policy issues and understand what the people would think if they actually had the opportunity to think and to consider all the different options that are on the table. So it's a way to getting the opinions of an informed public.
What does that mean, though? I don't understand. Like, how are you preparing people to answer an issue besides informing them of, some of the basics of the issue? What do you mean?
Well, the reason why it's called deliberative polling is the act of engaging each other in a deliberation. So when people get into a discussion together, it is really weighing the trade-offs of these difficult issues. So for example, if we're talking about immigration, there are pro and con issues on, any given topic. And for one of our projects from American One Room that we did in 2019, there were proposals such as increasing visas for high-skilled workers or increasing number of visas for low-skilled workers. So there are arguments on both sides. And when people come together and talk about these proposals, they have to weigh the different sides of the argument. And as they're talking and having these difficult discussions, whether it be facts and figures they bring in or personal anecdotes, personal stories, people begin to start understanding what are the intricacies of these different policies and how they affect everyday lives of folks. And so as people discuss, they become informed and they learn. And not only, the hard facts, but they learn about how all of this affects not just ourselves, but other people around us. And it's a way of really understanding what it means to live in a society, so many different types of people that, need different types of policies. So the whole purpose of deliberative polling is really to get an informed view of public opinion.
So, okay. What sources are providing the information to people that are supposed to deliberate on an issue? And are the people being randomly chosen and then, given this information to make a decision? Or like, what's the whole process look like if you're going to work on a given issue from start to finish?
Are you referring to the participants that come, or are you referring to the plenary? So we have a plenary session panel, and then we also had an advisory committee that reviews materials.
When you're using the AI system, I guess that's what I wanted to really ask. I'm sorry. What are the benefits and differences in using your AI system you talked about versus how you were doing it before?
I see. Well, the one great benefit about using the AI-assisted platform is that you don't need human moderators. As great as in-person events are, and as much as we can train moderators, we are human, and everyone will have their, slightly different style of engaging with participants. So the difficulty is that there are always differences in how the groups will react to a moderator, because in theory, we would want to, a moderator in group A, we should be able to kind of take that moderator and put them into another room, and those groups would have exactly the same conversation. But unfortunately, with human moderators, that's probably unlikely, because, everyone just kind of conducts it just slightly differently. And then on the other hand, as much training as we can do, there are always some moderators that perhaps are not up to par. And so those groups' experiences may not be what we would want them to be. So the AI-assisted platform really helps us have the consistency and the high quality deliberation that we want across the hundreds of groups that we can do simultaneously on the platform. And because we can have this consistency, that means that we can have essentially unlimited amount of groups on our platform at the same time. And I think at some point, we could have millions of people on the platform deliberating. There could be a deliberation day where everyone jumps on the platform, has discussions, perhaps before they vote or before they engage in some important decision, and they can talk to each other all at the same time. And so it's really liberating to think that we can actually bring deliberation to a broader set of people in society rather than just perhaps a microcosm.
So is the AI the moderator, or how does this work? What is the training for the moderators? What makes this different or more efficacious?
So we've built the platform. All the design features are based on how we normally train human moderators for the deliberative polling process. And for example, in the deliberative polls that we have in person, people tend to raise their hand and there's a queue. to get ready to speak. So on the platform, there's a queue. You request to speak. And as you request to speak, there's a queue that's forms. And then there's an agenda. The platform manages the agenda. So each of the topics are timed. And if the group wants to, perhaps if they feel like they're done with agenda number 1, they want to move to agenda number 2, they can ask the platform to move on, and participants will vote amongst themselves to decide whether they want to move on to the next topic, just as you would in an in-person deliberation. If the group feels like they've talked enough, then the moderator would move on to the next topic. There is nudging that can be done on the platform, where participants that may not have spoken a lot will get nudges from the platform automatically to encourage them to speak. And this aspect, actually, there's a greater benefit than the in-person, because in the in-person, oftentimes the moderator would have to stop a conversation in order to encourage someone to speak. Whereas in the platform online, we can actually nudge the person individually because the individual sees it on their screen only. So we could be nudging multiple people at the same time to encourage them to speak. And then now we're playing around with different ways of nudging and providing certain arguments like, oh, can you refer to this argument in your materials? And what do you think of that? And trying to give nuances to encourage people to speak. And
what about a feature that would transcribe what's being said and people could scroll back a little bit? Maybe they could use a keyword if they want to weigh in on something, and it would jump and find the instances when the keyword or keywords were used, and then kind of assemble it all so the person could look and see back in the discussion and then answer more effectively.
Yeah, that's a great idea too. We have real-time transcription of the deliberations, so that certainly is possible.
Or if you want to identify, it was Bob or Sue that said it, or who brought up the idea of the purple this,
Yeah.
And I guess the system could track that and showcase that again.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
So what have you noticed is the difference in the type and quality of discussion and deliberation with your system versus, the way it was done before?
Well, interestingly, many people had asked that question, and we were eager to find out, especially because we are now doing so many of these deliberations online. And we find that on the topic of opinion change, actually, we see this really the same amount of opinion change online in these deliberations as we see in person. So it's quite fascinating. We had a deliberation on climate and energy just September of 2021, and we saw massive amounts of change among topics that surrounded whether electric vehicles the sale of them should end by 2035, or support for different types of energy sources increased a lot as well. And the amount of opinion change was very dramatic, very similar to events that we've done in person in the past. We also see that people form relationships as they have these deliberations over the course of the weekend. By the end of deliberation for one of the events we did in Chile, some of the groups were crying, saying that they don't want to go and they really want to stay and have continued conversations with their group. And many people were exchanging social media handles and exchanging email addresses because they want to stay in touch with the people in their group. And we see also that empathy is being built in the discussions, as well as people are sharing their personal anecdotes. And we've done a number of follow-up interviews with participants and really understanding how the deliberations have impacted them. And we see a lot of changes that are happening to the folks that we interviewed. So all in all, I think the effect is quite significant, whether it is online or in person.
Well, what's an example of some of the feedback you've heard that really perked your ears up?
So I did a couple podcast series interviewing a number of participants after these events. So a couple examples that stand out from the first American One Room event that we did. There was a older woman who lived in Texas for most of her life. And after participating in the in-person event that was had, she decided that she would move herself to another state to move to North Carolina. And the move, she said, was directly attributed to the fact that she participated in this event. And she said that she felt way too comfortable in her place in Texas. She had retired. She was a school teacher and a school administrator. And now she realized after participating in the event that she needs to be stimulated intellectually, and she needs to meet other people, and that she was way too comfortable in her own setting. And so she moved herself to North Carolina, to a place that she felt would really give her the intellectual stimulation that was needed, and to be around people that were different from her. That was one of the more dramatic changes, to uproot yourself and to go somewhere else because of just this experience that she had. Another one that stands out is an event that we did with Shaping Our Future, which was among 18 to 29-year-olds. And this one person had a group where they were talking about economic inequality. And in his group, one of the participants called another participant racist. And of course, it was a very stressful time in that group's discussion. And this participant I interviewed decided to jump in. And he said, well, my mother is also from a small town and she's also racist. But he said he continues to have very open and honest conversations with her and tries to understand what her views are. And so he continued and shared examples to say, his mom is the way she is because her town and the experiences she had is what makes her life. And so she can't have experiences that she didn't have, which, helped people understand like why certain people have certain opinions. And then after he shared, another person jumped in and said, well, I'm from this small town. I'm not racist. In fact, she has a lot of friends that are, and she has difficulty navigating her daily life because of that. And as this conversation continued, the person that originally made the comment jumped in and said, wow, I'm so grateful for everyone sharing so much about this issue. And she continued to ask some questions to better understand other people's views. And as I interviewed this participant, he said he felt that, he empathized. He felt that empathy was being built amongst his group because of what was said and about the experiences that were shared. And it was really wonderful for him to have experienced it. And he realized that it was possible to really grow and learn so much in even in this online setting. So those are a couple examples that stand out in terms of how deliberation has been so beneficial.
Okay, well, excellent. That helps. What about sortition, random sampling of people to debate an issue? Do you engage in any of that, or is your work not cover that area?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, deliberative polling, the first step is to get a microcosm, is to do random sampling of a population. So all of the events, well, let's just say 99% of the events that we do are based on random sampling.
How can it be a microcosm if it's random sampling?
Well, when you draw a random sample of a population, the idea is to extract what would be a small number of cases that would represent the greater population. Is that not the case?
Oh, well, I mean, it's not purely random, but it's like a directed randomness.
Well, stratified random sampling is used in most real life situations. Stratified random sampling is definitely what is deployed. I don't know many cases where people are able to use pure random sampling in real life cases. It's kind of difficult to do that.
Well, I just don't know. What is stratified random sampling?
Stratified random sampling is most polling firms, organizations, because, if you're, doing a national sample of the United States, for example, one way to stratify perhaps is by states. So you would randomly select people from each state so that you would have enough people representing each of the states. So that's an example of what stratified random sampling would be.
Well, if you want to get a microcosm, then I guess the stratified sampling would have to be more directed. You want to get, I guess, men and women. You want to get old people, young people. Maybe people rural and city, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some common What are some common stratifications, for instance?
As you just described, aside from geography, sometimes people use gender or race and ethnicity. Yeah, other types of demographic variables are very popular. I think geography is a very common one. And so, but as you said, gender, race, ethnicity, sometimes, people use income or party, depending on, what the purpose is for those projects or surveys that they are deploying.
Yeah, I just wondered if it's a well-developed area or field of study and there's like guidelines, depending on what you're debating, you want to use I'm just making this up, the Herschel method of random stratification versus the Braithwaite method. I don't know if it's that developed.
No, I mean, I don't think I don't think anyone's named after different methods of stratification. But stratified, but this way of random sampling is very popular. Of course, there are other methods of sampling too that are less rigorous, but I would say that most people that are interested in getting a sample of a population that is representative would probably employ fairly rigorous sampling methods.
So what do you think will be the future of your work? Where's it all headed? I mean, it can be in multiple directions, but what new things are you working on over the next few years?
Sure. Well, I do hope at some point that we'd be able to use our deliberation platform to engage millions of people. It would be wonderful to be able to engage that many people together simultaneously to have a conversation that could really affect the way people understand how a democracy should work. Because in a democracy, we have to listen to each other, whether you agree or whether you disagree. That doesn't matter, but listening to each other really is key to understand how we can move forward. So I think that we are working towards that goal of having more people on the platform. Aside from that, and having projects that will help have some policy impact, whether in the States or in different parts of the world, where we've worked in 34 countries, 100 plus projects around the world on different topics. So we hope to continue doing that in the next few years.
Well, very good, Alice. Where can people find out more about your work? Where can they go?
Yes, and find us on our website. That's cdd.stanford.edu.
Well, that's pretty simple. Okay, so cdd.stanford.edu.
Yes.
And the CDD is what, the Center for Deliberative Democracy?
That's right.
Okay, just want to make sure I got it right. Well, great, Alice. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Of course, absolutely. It was fun to have this conversation with you.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.